Amendment Bill 2023. This council now becomes Committee of the Whole Council to consider the road traffic legislation enhancing personalized point-to-point transport services Amendment Bill 2023. Members may refer to the appendix to the script for the debate and voting arrangements for the bill. Members have been informed that the committee will conduct a joint debate on the clauses, schedule, and amendments. I now propose the question to you that the following clauses and schedule stand part of the bill. Clauses 1 to 56 and schedule. The Secretary for Transport and Logistics will move an amendment which seeks to amend Clause 55. Mr. Luk Chung-hung will move an amendment which seeks to amend Clause 15. Members may refer to the appendix to the script for details of the amendments. Members may now proceed to a joint debate on the clauses, schedule, and amendments. I will first call upon the Secretary for Transport and Logistics to speak. Then I will call upon Mr. Luk Chung-hung to speak, but they are not required to move the amendments at this stage. Then I will call upon other members to speak. Upon the conclusion of the joint debate, the committee will first vote on the clauses and schedule with no amendments standing part of the bill, and then deal with the amendments according to the arrangement set out in the appendix to the script. Secretary for Transport and Logistics. Chairman, I move an amendment to amend Clause 53 of the Road Traffic Legislation Enhancing Personalized Point-to-Point Transport Services Amendment Bill 2023. Details are set out in the paper already issued to members. The committee stage amendment seeks to amend the Chinese text of the new Section 5210C1 of the Road Traffic Ordinance, Cap 374, by replacing imprisonment for 3 months with imprisonment for 6 months, as well as to amend the Chinese text of the new Section 5210C2 by replacing imprisonment for 6 months with imprisonment for 12 months. The objective is to raise the maximum term of imprisonment for offences relating to the illegal carriage of passengers for hire or reward by motor vehicles. Corresponding amendments will be made to the English version of the bill for consistency. Chairman, I urge members to support my amendment. I so submit. Mr. Luk Chung-hung. Chairman, I am moving this amendment in relation to Clause 15, that is to improve the license conditions for taxi fleet licenses. I propose to amend the proposed new Regulation 12 capital D in relation to the threshold for license issuance. One of the conditions is in relation to the ratio of the number of taxis proposed to be owned by the applicant to be operated to the total number of taxis in that fleet is not less than the threshold of 5%. Well, contrary to what the Secretary said, I am proposing a lowering of the threshold from 10% to 5%. The purpose is to allow more small to medium-sized taxi operators to apply for a taxi fleet license. Now, for those who are tech-savvy, in terms of running an online car-hailing platform, they can join hands with the small to medium-sized taxi operators to apply for a license. The second amendment relates to the ratio of the number of taxi drivers to be employed by the licensee to the total number of taxi drivers in that fleet, which is not less than the threshold of 50%. In other words, in that fleet, there should be at least 50 drivers employed by the operator. This is of essence because whether or not this regime will success depends on whether we can make a breakthrough from the existing market ecosystem. Now, at the moment, the market system operates on scarcity. Because of insufficient taxi licenses, the owners will be able to reap an income from renting out the taxis. The taxi owners do not need to rack their brains on how they should improve their service quality. This is exactly what I'm going after. For the taxi trade, this is not something new. In the 60s or 70s, some taxi drivers were driving the taxis as an employee of the owners. I am reinstating this approach to safeguard the interests of drivers, because the taxi drivers pay for the to pay in order to rent a taxi, and the taxi owner in turn would provide a taxi regardless of the taxi drivers. The taxi owner would not care about the attitude, the image of the taxi driver, the driving demeanor, and even the cleanliness of the taxi compartment. So at the end of the day, we're able to substantially improve taxi service quality. This is our concern. That is why I am proposing this amendment, so that we can provide or safeguard taxi drivers' income to a certain extent. Now, this is not a total guarantee, but at least we will be able to attract new blood to the trade. And then, with improvement in fleet management and the user rating system, we will be able to ensure that taxi drivers will not be making detours or driving their taxis to God knows where. And at the same time, the taxi drivers' income can be safeguarded. Some members asked whether there are side effects to my amendments. Now, since this is the committee stage amendment, I can speak for another round. I'm trying to create a win-win situation for taxi owners, drivers, as well as passengers. If I may, I will respond to the points raised by other members in my next round. Mr. Tony Chair. Deputy Chair, the bill seeks to introduce a taxi fleet regime, and there is also increased penalties for taxi-related offences of a more serious nature. It also proposed to increase proposed to introduce a two-tier penalty system, and also raising the penalties for offences, including maximum fines and maximum terms of imprisonment, so as to go after the black sheep of the family and lift the image of the taxi trade as a whole. For illegal carriage of passengers for hire or reward by motor vehicles, the bill proposes to increase the maximum penalties for offenders on first and subsequent convictions and lengthen the period of impoundment of vehicles so as to increase deterrence. Now, the taxi trade supports an increase in the penalties. However, they question the approach. There should be a corresponding increase in the maximum term of imprisonment for the white license vehicle services. The bill proposes lengthening the period of impoundment of the vehicle. I think this is the most effective way to combat drivers engaged in illegal carriage of passengers for hire or reward. But at the same time, the term of imprisonment will be increased. On the first conviction is a maximum of 6 months, on subsequent convictions 12 months. Now, I don't see any problem with that on the face of it. This tariff serves as a reference for courts. The courts will have regard to the actual circumstances of the case, and law-abiding drivers should not be wary of the new penalties. That is why the administration, in the end of the day, heeded the views of the trade and accepted Mr. Frankie Yick's proposal I commend the administration for that. As for Mr. Michael Luk's amendment, that is, there should be an employer-employee relationship between the licensee and at least 50% of the taxi drivers in the fleet, and as well as lowering the ratio of number of taxis in the fleet to total number of taxis to 5%. I have reservations. Now, the original proposal is a threshold of 10% for taxi drivers hired by the taxi fleet licensee. This proposal is the outcome of a consensus forged with the trade. There are justifications. In terms of this percentage, the administration proposes including this percentage as a license condition, not as a provision in the law, so that flexibility will be allowed for future adjustments in light of the circumstances. Now, Mr. Michael Luk is proposing that the licensee should maintain an employment relationship with at least 50% of the taxi drivers in his fleet. Perhaps he is only thinking from the perspective of labor rights. He has disregarded the ecosystem of the trade. It may be very difficult for fleet licensees to operate in this environment. And at the end of the day, they may not be able to help the government achieve the objective of improving taxi service quality. As for the original proposed threshold of 10%, this will bring benefits to the trade, because taxi owners will be incentivized to employ some taxi drivers up to 10%. As such, I am opposed to Mr. Michael Luk's amendments, along with other G19 members. Mr. Frankie Yik. I support increasing the maximum penalties for illegal carriage of passengers from 3 to 6 months on first conviction and 6 to 12 months on subsequent convictions. About a decade ago, when the online car-hailing platform started to emerge, most of the drivers just took their bosses' vehicles or used their own vehicles to ply the trade. Now the situation has changed. There are calls for the government to lengthen the period of suspension of the driver's license for those who engage in illegal carriage of passengers. At the moment, even if the offender's vehicle is in the government vehicle pound, they can rent another vehicle from the renting companies. That is why we must at the same time increase the maximum penalty of imprisonment to achieve deterrence. Now, in this bill also provides for more increased penalties to target 4 taxi driver-related offenses of a serious nature. For the first 4 taxi driver-related offenses, both the maximum fines and maximum imprisonment terms will be increased. For white license vehicles, however, only the fines will be increased, not the maximum term of imprisonment. It is totally illogical. It also gives this misconception that it may be less serious an offense to drive a white license vehicle than to be an offending taxi driver. That is why I proposed the amendments to increase the penalties. Finally, the administration supported my amendments. Hence, the Secretary will be moving the committee stage amendments. On Mr. Michael Luk's proposed amendments, there are 2 elements. First, he will lower the ratio of the number of taxis owned by the owner, as well as the number of taxi drivers employed by the taxi owners. Now, I'll speak on these 2 points. I think Mr. Michael Luk's original intention is to make it more favorable for the single drivers to join the taxi fleet regime. However, I think Mr. Luk has neglected the actual requirements in the provision. regardless of the number, the actual number, the requirement is that they must own the fleet taxis of not less than 10% of the minimum fleet size. Taking this as the basis, that means a fleet operator can operate and apply for a license with just 30 taxis. Now, if this owner owns 1,000 taxis, then the threshold still applies, just 30 taxis. But according to Mr. Michael Luk's amendment, even if the threshold is lowered from 10% to 5%, then taking one who owns 1,000 taxis as an example, the owner will need to own at least 50 taxis. This is a higher threshold than the one proposed by the administration. I don't think this is Mr. Michael Luk's original intention.
I will supplement later on the other part. According to Mr. Luk, well, I think he probably misunderstood the original bill proposed by the government. Your purpose was to have a fleet instead of have like scattered operation. I will explain more about his problems later. Thank you. Mr. Ben Chen. The driving offense point system. According to the bill, there will be penalties triggered, including imprisonment term, and there will be amendments concerning the imprisonment term. In relation to illegal carriage for reward or hire and overcharging, they are different. You may say that illegal carriage may be just transporting or passengers. However, in one case, there was an accident and the taxi driver died. The insurance company would not compensate for the passenger, and the passenger was paralyzed. And there was no way for the injured passenger to get compensation. And the hirer was only providing a platform. We had talks with the relevant company and we didn't get very positive feedback. We decided to hold a press conference, and it was only until then that the victim got some kind of protection. It's not like we can handle the situation like this in all cases. So illegal carriage will pose certain risks to passengers. In this amendment, the bill proposed by the government suggests that the penalty should be raised on only the taxi driver's part. I don't think that's fair, so I agree with what Mr. Frankie Yik said about raising the penalty, and I give my support to that. On the amendments proposed by Mr. Michael Luk, I believe he proposed amendments with a good intention. He wanted to have more taxi fleets. If we have scattered fleets, it's hard to manage these fleets. Management companies may rent out the taxis. If they fail to rent out taxis, they'll have to pay money to the taxi owners. And that would give little incentive to taxi owners to ensure good management. They would just want to make sure that the taxi is rented out to a driver every month. Because as long as someone drives a taxi, he would get paid. It doesn't matter to the owner how the driver uses the taxi, and that would affect the performance of the entire trade. I think there should be a change to such phenomena. This will affect not just the reputation of the trade, but also the entire city. So I think there should be amendments to the law. As the point about the threshold of 5% and 10% proposed by Mr. Michael Luk, well, in the end of the day, when tender exercises were conducted, whether the companies think this is a good threshold or if they want to raise a threshold, well, as long as you include this in the licensing provision, you will allow yourself room to have flexibility when you hold tender exercises. The second amendment raised by Mr. Michael Luk concerns the salary. The salary and the performance of the taxi drivers have direct relationship. Pay does not necessarily affect the performance of the taxi driver, but I think 10% is something negotiated between the taxi trade and the government. I don't think we should recklessly change it because it might have an impact on the trade and no one might want to make a bid. I think we should keep the 10%, and the government should conduct an interim review, and whether we should make further changes, we can review it later. So I speak in and I oppose to the amendments made by Mr. Michael Luk. Mr. Louis Long. Deputy President, in relation to Clause 55 of the bill, the government proposes the maximum term of penalty from $5,000 to $10,000. And it should be increased to level 3 to level 4, that is $25,000. I give my support to that. In relation to Clause 56 of the bill, extending the period of revoking the license, and the relevant penalty will be increased from 3 to 6 months to 6 months to 12 months. I give my support to this. During the scrutiny of the bill, Mr. Frankie Yik suggested increasing the proposed maximum penalty from 3 months to 6 months, and for subsequent conviction from 6 months to 12 months to enhance deterrent effect. Most members of the Mills Committee agree with the suggestions made by Mr. Yik. The administration, upon listening to members, decided to raise an amendment concerning Clause 55 to raise the maximum penalty for offenses relating to the illegal carriage of passengers. I support the amendment. As to the amendment on Clause 15 made by Mr. Michael Luk, I have reservation. Mr. Michael Luk is of the view that under the proposed fleet regime, the operator must have at least 10% of the fleet that maintains employment relationship with the taxi owners. And the ratio was proposed by Mr. Luk to be increased to 15%. This amendment significantly increases the threshold of setting up a fleet, and that would put people off from setting up a fleet. And that would give less incentive to people. Incorporating such amendments would contradict with the purpose of setting up taxi fleets. In the future, the administration can, based on the circumstances of the society and the development of the trade, more flexibly adjust the licensing conditions without amending the legislation. Mr. Michael Luke proposes to incorporate the licensing conditions into the bill, and this would make it less flexible for the government to make relevant adjustments in the future. I speak in support of the amendments proposed by the government. Thank you. Mr. Lai Tong-kwok. Deputy President, I speak in support of the amendments made by the Secretary concerning Clause 55 of the bill. As we know, that white licensed vehicles cause many problems. As mentioned by my fellow colleagues during the motion debate just now, we have to face this problem or tackle it squarely. We have to come up with a penalty that is proportionate to the offense. I understand the purpose of Mr. Michael Luke proposing his amendments. He made it with good intention. However, the amendments proposed have not undergone discussions of relevant parties or stakeholders, and we have not studied the amendments in detail during the scrutiny of the bill at the Bills Committee. Will these amendments proposed by Mr. Luke be consistent with the bill?
We cannot be sure. That's why, for this reason, I cannot support Mr. Michael Luke's amendment. Mr. Michael Luke. Thank you, Chairman. Now, today, the focus of this debate is about taxi fleets. Taxi fleets are proposed so we could improve the quality of taxi service. But maybe at the end of the day, after all this fanfare, there is still no improvement to taxi services. That's why I have resorted to this rather rigid way to set the employment relationship at 50%. Well, I have no other choice, because in the past we've left it to the market, and most of the time bosses want to minimize their liability. If you ask them to hire more than 10% of the taxi drivers, it will be very difficult, even for 10%. Well, again, let me address the two main concerns that some members spoke about. Well, maybe they say it's not practical to have this kind of more than 10% of employment relationship. Well, because of new technologies, and it's actually possible to have an employment relationship with taxi drivers. In the past, with that technology, after a taxi driver receives a base salary, maybe he will just cruise around or even take his family out for an outing, and he won't actually work, and then he finished work at the end of the day. Yes, it could happen in the past if there are dishonest taxi drivers. But now we have new technology, so you could monitor the locations of the taxis, and then there is also weight sensors on the seats, and so that means you know whether the passengers, if they're passenger, of course, there is a fare paid, and so by checking the taximeter, you know how much the driver has made in a day. And so there are such technologies to track all these activities, and of course there could be reviews by customers, the attitude of the driver, whether he takes his passengers up on time, and so on. So there are various ways to monitor the performance of taxi drivers. That's why now with technological advancement, it's possible to increase the employment to increase employment of the taxi drivers. Now, of course, that may add to the cost of the fleet. If we ask for higher number of taxis to be owned by license holders, and of course costs will go up, but then what will change? Insurance premium. if we have an employment system for taxi drivers as supervision of taxi drivers' performances, where we know that these taxi drivers have good track records, they haven't been involved in accidents, then the insurance companies may be prepared to lower the premium because these are taxi drivers with good track record. And another consideration, of course, is whether there is an increase in the overall income. Now, if we have an employment system for taxi drivers, of course, still it doesn't mean there won't be complaints. With bus drivers, there's also an employment system, and there are many more complaints against bus drivers. And if there are few complaints about taxi drivers, that means a reputation is built up. That means more passengers are prepared to patronize a certain taxi fleet. And because there's an employment arrangement, more may be prepared to join the trade. So that means there will be more taxi drivers. So there will be fewer idle taxis. That means the taxi owners will see increase in income. And even if you take out if you deduct expenses arising from an employment arrangement, such as basic pay, bonus, and so on, still perhaps there will be increase in income. I know it will be difficult to get these amendments passed today, but I hope members will keep an open mind. At the same time, I hope the government and the trade will be more proactive in promoting the employment system of taxi drivers. Now, even if my amendments can be passed today, I hope in your administrative guidelines you review it and increase the percentage of taxi drivers under the employment of the fleet of the license holders. And then taxi drivers will get better pay, and there will be better service for passengers and also better income for the owners. Thank you. Mr. Frankie Yik. Well, Mr. Michael Luk did point out certain shortcomings in the operation of taxis these days. Yes, there are taxis that are fleets that are well managed, but then most taxi owners just hire out their taxis, and this is where there are shortcomings. And that's why earlier on I suggested even the taxi trade is aware of this. That's why they have proposed to the government to form taxi fleets, and now the government has introduced a bill, and we welcome that. Now, with taxi fleet regimes, there will be many more conditions imposed. That means there will be additional operating costs. So for those only people who are keen to improve taxi service will come forward to bid in the tendering exercise. So now we have a serious shortage of taxi drivers, and with the current operating condition, if you now raise the threshold, you will actually put off all the prospective investors. And then there is another requirement that the taxi fleet operator must report changes in taxi drivers to the transport department. But then there is high turnover in the taxi trade. In fact, for bus drivers and others, there is no such a requirement. How come for taxi drivers we have to keep reporting to the Commissioner of Transport, who are on my team as taxi drivers? If Mr. Michael Luk's amendments are passed, no one will want to submit a bid in the tendering exercise, and that goes against the original intention of the bill, because the bill is about allowing those who want to improve taxi service to form taxi fleet. And so the taxi fleet will be under management, and then they will meet the public aspirations for personalized point-to-point transport services. Now, if we go by Mr. Michael Luk's amendments, then if an applicant cannot meet the thresholds, then the Commissioner of Transport will reject the application. That's why the Liberal Party will not support Mr. Michael Luk's amendment. So I speak in support of the Secretary's amendment, but I speak against the amendments by Mr. Michael Luk. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I now call upon Mr. Michael Luk and the Secretary for Transport Logistics, who are moving amendments, to speak again. Then the debate will come to close. Mr. Michael Luk, do you wish to speak again? Chairman, I am moving these two amendments. Oh, yes, these amendments were not formally discussed at the Bills Committee, but then the concept behind these amendments was discussed repeatedly. So it's not the case that there's been no discussion at the Bills Committee. And second point, yes, I know that there is little prospect of the amendments being passed today, but then my worry is if we still have taxi fleets where taxis are just rented out to drivers, taxi owners earn rent, and taxi drivers will still make their own income. If that's the case, there are not substantial changes. So what other new measures does the government have up its sleeve? So so that means there will be any new supply, and then the way taxis are rented out now remains the same, and there's no substantial improvement in service standards. Then the government will have to consider what to do next. I hope the taxi trade will do something. You are here to serve the entire community. You also serve many foreign visitors coming to Hong Kong. You are you are important in upholding the image of Hong Kong. So I hope my amendments will be supported by members. I hope the members will keep an open mind to promote the healthy development of the taxi trade. Secretary, do you wish to speak again? Chairman, I thank members for their views on the amendments proposed by the administration. We propose increasing the penalty for the illegal carriage of passengers for high reward by motor vehicles. This is to enhance the deterrent effect. We are also increasing the period. We're increasing the maximum penalty and also increasing the period for suspension of vehicle licenses and vehicle impoundment. And also, having heard members' views in the Bills Committee, we have moving amendments to increase the maximum term of imprisonment. So with all these increased penalties as well as a stepped up law enforcement effort, then we are able to crack down on these activities further. Now, Mr. Michael Luk proposes amendments that on the percentage of taxis owned by the license holder in a taxi fleet and the number of taxi drivers hired by the license holders. He's increasing the threshold. We don't support that approach. We believe we should leave this to licensing conditions instead of including it in the legislation that will allow more flexibility. And so it's more suitable. And having regard to the actual circumstances, the government could always make adjustment in a flexible manner. Now, members mentioned a midterm review. During the second reading debate, I said that I've heard members' views, and we will conduct a midterm review, and we'll see whether there's room for further improvement. Mr. Michael Luk amendments also requires a certain percentage, and we don't support that. I must point out that we have repeatedly consulted members and the trade in coming up with in designing this fleet taxi regime. So we have taken on board views expressed, and we want to make sure that while there is enhancement in taxi fleet service quality, we don't want the threshold to be too high and put off those interested. And also the proposal of the government has been considered carefully by the Bills Committee. On the number of taxis to be owned by the license holder, the government proposes a threshold of 10% of the fleet. That means no less than 30 per vehicle, or the number of drivers to be hired by the license holder. For urban taxis with no less than 30 drivers, and for NT fleets no less than 10 drivers. This is a suitable percentage, so there is a certain number of employed taxi drivers to enhance fleet management. At the same time, the threshold won't be too high to put off operators. Potential operators. Now, for Mr. Michael Luk's amendments, he said he's proposing that no less than 50% of the drivers in the taxi fleet must be employed by the license holder. That means if the fleet has 1,000 taxis and there are 2 shifts of drivers, that means the license holder must employ about 1,000 drivers. Now, currently it's not common for taxi owners to be the employer of taxi drivers. Most taxi drivers are self-employed. So Mr. Michael Luk's amendment will substantially raise the threshold for forming taxi fleets, and it will stifle development in this direction. As for the number of taxis in the taxi fleet, the government's proposal is that the license holder must own no less than 10% of the number of taxis in the fleet. That means for urban or mixed fleet is no less than 30 taxis, and for NT fleet is no less than 10 taxis. This percentage will allow taxi fleet license holders to be more involved in the management of the fleet. At the same time, we don't set the threshold too high to put off potential fleet operators. And then Mr. Michael Luk's amendment also proposes that a number of taxis owned by license holder must be no less than 5%. That means if the fleet is large and the license holder must own more taxis. Say if the fleet has 1,000 taxis, that means the license holder must own no less than 50 taxis. That's substantially more than the number proposed by the government. And this is actually not good for both taxi fleet operation and passengers. Mr. Michael Luk also proposes that the commissioner must require a series of information regarding the fleet. For example, a full list of taxi drivers in the fleet. We believe such amendments requiring information that's too tedious. It will substantially add to the administrative workload of the fleet operators, and again, it will deter potential operators. Take, for instance, for a large taxi fleet, there may be over 2,000 taxi drivers in the fleet. So by going by Mr. Michael Luk's amendment, whenever there's a change to a single taxi driver in the fleet, the information must be submitted to the commissioner. And the license must be submitted to the commissioner for making amendments. And then after making amendments, the commissioner must also issue the amended license again to the license holder. We do not think this is practicable. So having considered all these reasons, we hope members will vote against Mr. Michael Luk's amendment and support the government's amendment. Thank you.
We now first vote on the clauses and schedule with no amendment standing part of the bill. I put the question to you that the clauses and schedule with no amendment as set out in the appendix to the script stand part of the bill. Those in favor, please raise your hands. Those against, please raise your hands. I think the question is agreed by majority of the members present. I declare the motion passed. We now deal with the amendments. The voting arrangements are set out in the appendix to the script. Mr. LUK Chung-hung, you may move your amendment. Chairman, I move my amendment as set out in the appendix to the script. I propose a question to you that Mr. LUK Chung-hung's amendment be passed. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Mr. Luk claims division. The bell will ring for 5 minutes.
開始表
Please proceed to vote.
請核對
Please check your votes. If there are no questions, voting is stopped. The result is displayed. From ECs, 39 present, 3 for, 32 against, 4 abstentions. From FCs and GCs, 48 present, 6 for, 39 against, 2 abstentions. I think the question is not agreed by a majority of each of the two groups of members present. I declare the amendment negatived. I now put the question to you that Clause 15 stand part of the bill. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of the members present. I declare the motion passed. Secretary for Transport and Logistics, you may move your amendment. Chairman, I move my amendment as set out in the appendix to the script. I propose the question to you that the Secretary's amendment be passed. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of the members present. I declare the amendment passed. Clause 55 as amended. I now put the question to you that the clause as amended, just read out by the clerk, stand part of the bill. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of the members present. I declare the motion passed. All the proceedings on the road traffic legislation enhancing personalized point-to-point transport services amendment bill 2023 have been concluded in committee of the whole council. Council now resumes. Secretary for Transport and Logistics. President, I now report to the Council that the road traffic legislation enhancing personalized point-to-point transport services amendment bill 2023 has been passed by the committee of the whole Council with amendments. I move the motion that this Council adopts the report. I now propose the question to you that the Secretary's motion be passed. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Mr. Michael Tin claims a division. The division bell will ring for 5 minutes.
開始表決。
Members, please proceed to vote. Will members please check the votes? If there are no queries, voting shall now stop and the result will be displayed. 87 present, 78 for, 8 abstentions. The question is agreed by a majority of the members present. I declare the motion passed. Third reading. Road traffic legislation enhancing personalized point to